April the 2nd, 2025. Remember when Donald Trump did this?
You know, you think of the European Union, very friendly. They rip us off. It's so sad to see. It's so pathetic. 39%, we're going to charge them 20%, so we're charging them essentially half.
He called it Liberation Day, but some judges in America have just ruled he didn't actually have the authority to impose all those tariffs in the first place. So, what does this added bit of chaos mean for the world financial system? We'll discuss on this episode of the BBC's daily news podcast, Newscast. Hello, it's Adam in the Newscast studio, and you remember 57 days ago when Donald Trump hailed Liberation Day, when he imposed all those taxes on imports into America from literally every country and territory in the world. There was a minimum of 10% on everyone, but some countries got even more. And then with China, he put them up even higher, then brought them down again. He's negotiating with the EU to bring them down from 50%, although he actually paused the introduction of those ones. And then the UK and some other countries got their own trade deal that eliminated some of the tariffs. So it's been quite a rollercoaster ride. And there was another corkscrew on Thursday morning because a court in America ruled he actually did not have the legal authority to impose those tariffs in the first place. So what does this mean for his trade policy going forward and his authority as president? Let's discuss it now, because we've assembled a super brainy panel. Joining us on the line is one quarter of our sister podcast, Americast, Justin Webb. Hello, Justin.
Hello there.
Not in the worldwide headquarters of Americast, because I'm in the worldwide headquarters.
No, I'm at home babysitting my puppy.
Okay. I think people would actually rather have a podcast about that, but never mind. Also joining us from Washington, D.C. is Caitríona Perry. Hi, Caitríona.
Hi, Adam. No puppies here.
She's in the office, that's why. And then Gillian Tett, the Financial Times columnist, is joining us on the line as well. Hi, Gillian.
Delighted to be with you.
No animals near you?
Plenty of pigeons outside my window, but no dogs, I'm afraid, or puppies.
Right, that's all the pet content for this episode. Although you never say never.
Well, you never know. Absolutely, I may bring you more inadvertently, for which apologies in advance.
Okay, so Caitríona, just give us the basics then of this. What actually is this court that has made this ruling?
So this is a bipartisan court. It has national jurisdiction, and it looks very specifically at issues relating to trade. So what it has done is looked at what President Trump has done on the universal tariffs. Now, it's important to point out these are not the tariffs on steel and aluminium and cars. These are the kind of blanket tariffs that we saw, that baseline 10%, the 50% threatened on the EU, the 145% threatened on China. It's all of those ones. And the court has looked at what the Trump administration has said, the powers that it says it's using to impose these tariffs, and said, oh no, you don't. That is not legal, and you must reverse those tariffs within 10 days. Now, the Trump administration, as you imagine, very annoyed about this and has already moved to ask for a stay on that decision pending its appeal to the appeals court. And you would have to imagine this will eventually end up in the Supreme Court.
So, Caitríona, do we know what that means for those tariffs right now? Like, what are companies actually doing?
We don't, is the short answer. I feel like the word of this Trump administration is uncertainty, and that is where we find ourselves at this point. As we're talking now, it's kind of late morning US Eastern time. There will be a White House press briefing at 1 o'clock, 6 p.m. in the UK. So we are expecting a bit more clarity from the White House there. But for businesses themselves, I mean, they just don't know. As the ruling stands, anyone who's paid over tariffs to the US will be entitled to a refund of those tariffs. So if you are a business at this point, why would you pay over any more tariffs from here on in, right? If they're going to eventually, potentially, have to be refunded to you. So the sense today from businesses that I've been speaking to is they're going to basically revert to the pre-Liberation Day position, 2nd of April, we remember that day so clearly, and just kind of try and operate business as usual, because there can't really be any enforcement from the Trump administration, from the authorities at this point in time, given where this ruling is.
And Justin, when you scan through the ruling from the Court of International Trade, it's one of those classics of kind of American constitutional interpretation. It's about, where does the power lie? Is it with Congress? Is it with the office of the president? They go back to the Federalist Papers from when the Constitution was being written. Classic.
The whole thing is that where power lies is right at the heart of a debate within the conservative movement, within the Republican movement, the broad right wing of American society. And this is why this judgment is so unknowable in its future iterations, because it is entirely possible that it goes all the way to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court, you think, is a kind of very much a Trump-friendly court, and it is. But actually, because exactly of that business of how constitutionally important some serious right-wing Americans think it is to have a separation of powers and to make sure that Congress is in charge of things like tariffs, that they actually that view might actually win in the Supreme Court as well. And that's what makes this whole thing so tricky for people to work out what the likelihood is that there will be, in the end, a reversal of the lower court decision, because the politics of it is not clear, and the politics of it goes to the heart of things that people feel very strongly about within the right-wing movement, the MAGA movement.
And Gillian, I mean, there's one argument that, this is good if you're in favor of free trade, because actually it turns out these tariffs might not be permanently there. But actually, there's another argument that it's just more chaos, and any level of chaos is bad for the world trade system.
Well, I think right now, many companies, investors will be thinking, just when it couldn't get worse, it has. Because yes, there are plenty of global investors and traders who want the tariffs to go away. But what this has done is really inject 3 levels of uncertainty into the current situation. Firstly, if it goes to the Supreme Court, what will happen? Secondly, will Trump even abide by the decision of the lawyers? And thirdly, if he's not given permission to use these measures, these economic emergency measures around his tariffs, will he invoke other measures? Because there are other alternatives available to him.
I mean, it could be that this is a fight that he quite likes to have, a fight with the courts, because that works for him politically. My goodness, it worked for him politically before he was elected, didn't it? Kind of got him elected in many ways. But actually, at the same time, exactly as Gillian says, there are plenty of other ways that he might be able to get to where he wants to get to. It's just that how long it might take to do that. But then he might think that the length of time doesn't matter, because while he's having the fight, he's winning politically and not having the ill effects of the tariffs that so discombobulate a lot of Republican people in Congress.
And Caitríona, let's talk about the other side of the fight, the people actually brought this case. I mean, that's quite interesting as well.
Yeah, these were a group of small businesses. One of them, for example, was a wine merchant who just kind of said that these tariffs would potentially put them out of business. And where was the national emergency also is the other issue that's been brought up in all of this. Like to the point that Gillian and Justin were making there about who gets to decide where the power is and who gets to decide what is the national emergency. That's where the difference is, I guess, with the steel and aluminium and the auto parts. You can say that there's a national security issue there. Can you say that about wine? Can you say that about children's toys? It's a very complicated issue, but just heard from that wine company, who were one of the companies who brought the case, and they're obviously very happy, as you can imagine, but as we've been discussing, also still very uncertain about what lies ahead for them. There are other methods, and I think perhaps we'll hear this from the White House later on, indeed possibly from the president, where he could invoke a different power and levy tariffs of 15%. They could only be for a maximum of 150 days. But given, what we've seen so far from the president about putting and making announcements and then pulling them back for a review, he's gotten very annoyed, of course, by this label coming from Wall Street, TACO. Trump always chickens out. He's really, really annoyed about that. So you can't underestimate the impact that may have on him as well in terms of what comes next.
And we can actually hear Donald Trump reacting in real time when he's introduced to this taco concept, which has become a bit of a meme in the last few days. Here he is being asked about it by a reporter at a press conference.
Oh, isn't that nice? Chicken out. I've never heard that. You mean because I reduced China from 145% that I set down to 100 and then down to another number? 6 months ago, this country was stone cold dead We had a dead country. We had a country people didn't think it was going to survive, and you ask a nasty question like that. It's called negotiation. You set a number, but don't ever say what you said. That's a nasty question. Go ahead. To me, that's the nastiest question.
I mean, there's a lot to unpick there. But Gillian, let's focus on that thing about presidential authority. Where does this leave Trump's authority on the scale?
Well, what's very interesting is that he has spent the last few months acting like the biggest bully in the playground, trying to really stoke up fear in all quarters. And what anyone knows about bullies and what you get taught in school is if you stand up to bullies, their power is often less impregnable than they themselves think or that it seems to other people. And what we're starting to see is that Donald Trump's power may not be as strong as it seemed a few weeks ago. And the really interesting question is, on the back of learning that, what is the European Union going to do in their negotiations with Trump? Are they going to really stand up and push back in the way that the Chinese have done? Or are they going to be more conciliatory in the way that, say, one might say the UK has done? But either way, this taco jibe has clearly got to him. I take a certain amount of pride because I think the FT was probably the first one to actually report on it. Robert Armstrong, my colleague. But it certainly is a question about whether Trump is so sensitive to taco that he basically reveals that he's a lot weaker, or he fears he's weaker than it seems.
I remember when the UK and the EU signed their trade and cooperation agreement, I tried to call it the Taco Treaty and it didn't catch on. So congratulations to your colleague for making taco stick this time. Justin, how does this play with Trump's base? Because actually the whole point is that he's strong and he takes the fight to America's enemies. And this shows him sort of perhaps not being right or mighty.
Do you know what? I don't think people notice very much. I mean, I think the political impact of this would be if the tariffs do go ahead in big numbers and there is inflation, then that definitely has an impact. And that's what worries a lot of Republican Congress people, because, of course, the midterm elections are in 26, so only a year away. So that would definitely have an effect. But the fights with the court and all the rest of it, I don't think it really has a particularly big political effect. His opinion ratings are down a bit, but seem to have plateaued again. I'm not sure that this kind of thing, there are so many distracting things, like the fight with Harvard, like the business of the various fights he's having with various jurisdictions around the United States, all the culture war stuff, the immigration thing that they do still go on about and has been, frankly, quite a success. There are far fewer people coming illegally over the southern border than there were under Joe Biden. There's plenty for them to talk about that isn't this, and I don't actually think immediately it's going to have much of an impact.
I think what you're seeing increasingly is a split voter base, in that the MAGA base are loving what he's doing and becoming as loyal, if not even more loyal. And insofar as the Trump team frames what's happened with the courts as the deep state attacking them, then they have to fight back. That's going to certainly support his popularity amongst the MAGA base. You also got, though, this crucial section of voters who were Democrat before, flipped back in November, and the polls suggest that many of them are getting buyer's remorse because of the threat of inflation and things like that. So what really matters in the coming months is what's going to happen to the price of petrol, gas on the forecourt. What are they going to see in supermarkets? If prices start going down, you'll see probably support. But if, on the contrary, all of this disruption to supply chains, which is invoking memories of the COVID pandemic, pushes prices up, you'll start seeing voters lash out in that middle undetermined section.
My favorite fact I've learned today from reading that judgment, which I did over my lunch, is that this legislation for declaring an emergency and acting in this way comes from the Jimmy Carter era. And he signed it because there was an inquiry into how many emergencies there were in America live in the 70s. And it turns out one of the emergencies was about people hoarding gold. And that emergency had started in 1933. And it had been going on for more than 40 years. So a very, very long emergency. So that's my very minor historical fact I'll be dining out on for the next few days. Caitríona, another thing that's happened, Elon Musk has left the chat.
He's left the building, yeah. He's taken his cheese head and his chainsaw and everything else with him, and off he goes. Not as dramatic as it may seem, because, he was this special government employee, so he only had 130 days that he could work with President Trump before all kinds of kind of checks would kick in, and he would have had to disclose things and recuse himself and become a proper employee. So he was running out of road, let's say, anyway. But for a chap who came in, right-hand man to the president, it does seem that he's leaving across a bit of a gulf from the president. Obviously, we saw the comments just in the last couple of days in the interview that Elon Musk did with CBS, where he described the big, beautiful bill in not very flattering terms and said, maybe it's big, maybe it's beautiful, but you can't be both at the same time, or words to that effect. But I mean, with a long eye on it, you'd have to say his entire endeavor has been quite a failure for President Trump. Everything that the Doge guys set out to do, they hit nowhere near their target of 1 trillion savings. Much of what they've done has left the government in tatters, has left many people unemployed or in an uncertain position, has reduced agencies like USAID and many others to an irredeemable position, shuttered potentially forever, never to be put back together again, and just caused kind of maximum chaos for what payoff his own company in difficulties as well, notwithstanding that free ad that he got on the lawn of the White House for Teslas. How can we forget that? And so many viral moments, which I'm sure X, the platform, will definitely have benefited from.
And the point, Adam, is that federal expenditure during this whole time has continued to go up. And for people who are really serious about seeing it go down, that says to them, this hasn't worked, something else has got to work. And that then brings up a conversation which is uncomfortable for Donald Trump about the things that genuinely have to be cut, particularly if one of those things, as is in the big, beautiful bill, so-called, is Medicaid. And that has a real impact on Republican voting poorer people. And that decision hasn't been made yet, but if it's made, will be a very big one politically and potentially with real consequences. But, having drawn people's attention to what they genuinely do regard, many Americans, as federal waste and places where money can be saved, it's been extraordinary to see that it's just not as easy as people have often claimed to do it. And the difficulties of doing it are now front and center of the political debate. And that I think for all lawmakers, but particularly for Republicans now, is a really difficult conversation and set of decisions that they have to make.
But Justin, you and Caitríona both mentioned the big, beautiful bill. For people who don't listen to every single episode of Americast, the tiny handful, just explain the significance of the big, beautiful bill, what
it's
it is.
It's a really odd thing. So Congress basically only has one act, as it were, to pass, one major bill to pass this year. They decided to put everything into this one bill, pretty much, and try to get it through. And it passed the House of Representatives by one. And it is essentially a spending bill. It sets out those things that the government is going to spend money on and those things that it is not. And the bill increases, according to most independent onlookers, increases the deficit and adds to the national debt, and does so potentially, and you see this on the bond markets, and Gillian's much better able to talk about this than I am, but you see it already. It genuinely concerns outside investors in the United States who say, hang on a second, this is really unfunded in a way that is unsustainable in the long term. And crucially for the politics of America and the difficulties of Donald Trump, that is also felt by really significant numbers of Republican lawmakers who are saying we've got to cut our spending. But at the same time, many of them saying we shouldn't cut our spending by cutting spending on the poor, like Medicaid, which is medical insurance for poorer Americans, because those are our people in this day and age, because we now are backed by America's poor, and the Democrats tend to be backed by the rich, which broadly speaking is actually true. So you've got this real kind of political set of decisions that have to be made about a budget that is essentially going through, and did go through, the House of Representatives. And if it goes through, Trump will sign it, but will with all sorts of potential political kind of landmines inside it for him.
And Gillian, so the U.S. national debt at a federal level is it $37 trillion now?
It is 37 trillion, and on current trajectory will hit 40 trillion really within a matter of couple of years. The bitter irony of what Elon Musk did in Washington was he not only caused himself and his own companies great brand damage, but he failed to achieve the spending cuts. And the very fact he was trying to do spending cuts appears to have actually given Republicans a sense of comfort about actually introducing this massive new spending bill, which is very ironic. Elon Musk himself has complained about the way that this bill is increasing the debt. And what America is in right now is a bit like the Wile E. Coyote moment in a kid's cartoon, where this cartoon figure goes off the cliff, is hovering in midair, legs pumping furiously, and stays up there until he looks down and panics and then crashes. So as long as investors believe that America will eventually pay off its debt, they'll keep buying Treasury bonds, US government bonds, and the whole game can continue. But if they stop and look at the numbers and realize that on current trends, it's going to be mathematically impossible for America to pay off its debts without radical reforms of the sort we've not yet seen, then there is a risk that at some point confidence will crack. We've seen confidence wobble several times recently, but as long as people think that the US House of Cards is relatively stable and the dollar is the global financial reserve currency, most of them are still addicted to buying bonds. But that cannot be taken for granted forever.
And Justin, I'm just thinking, it's a perennial, this whole idea of the debt ceiling. Oh, will Congress give permission for the federal government to borrow even more than it's technically allowed to under the law? And we all go, oh, it's going to be a disaster. America's going to default on its debt. And then the debt ceiling gets raised, and it always feels like a bit of a false alarm.
Yeah, but
is this another example of that, or is this something qualitatively different?
I don't think it is. It's much more serious than that. Because it is essentially, this big, beautiful bill is, essentially seen by a lot of economists as a kind of huge transfer of wealth away from the younger generation who will have to pay for it in the future and to the older generation who get tax breaks now or tax cuts now. And it has a kind of, it is so huge and what it does is so momentous that there is this sense that the bond markets, as Gillian was saying, might say enough. And in the event that they say enough, my goodness, we are in a completely different place politically. Plus, and I'll add this about Elon Musk, because in a way this ties in Elon Musk with all of this. Elon Musk, if he has genuinely left the Trump administration on not desperately good terms, there's another big impact of that. He spent a lot of money during the election on Donald Trump getting elected, spent some money more recently, and not actually that successfully, on trying to get Trump people through, but has promised to spend an absolute fortune on the 2026 midterms. And crucially, those Republican people in Congress who want to stand up to Donald Trump and say, Donald, you're getting this wrong, they have faced the real prospect that Elon Musk will fund a primary campaign against them when they come up for re-election. So someone will stand for the same party and Elon Musk will fund that person and they will lose their job and their career. If Elon Musk isn't spending that money now, we don't know whether he will or not, but if he's not, then that, it seems to me, allows Republicans to be much more independent and to stand up to Trump much more than they have done recently. And I think that's one of the kind of unknowns at the moment, but it is something really interesting that's thrown up by the events of the last day or so.
Yeah, fascinating. I mean, there is so much going on. It is quite hard to keep track of it all, although you three do a brilliant job of doing that for us. What is something that you're keeping an eye on in the next few days or the next few months, or maybe even the next few minutes, that actually will turn out to be quite significant and the world will be talking about, but maybe people haven't quite cottoned on to yet? Who wants to go first with that? Caitríona? What's on your radar?
Yeah, well, I'll just pick up on your in the next few minutes, because as we have been chatting there, the Trump administration has filed its document of appeal, going back to what we were talking about earlier regarding that Court of International Trade ruling, and it's looking for that permanent stay. It wants to take it straight to the Supreme Court, skip over the appeals court, and to potentially hear that as early as Friday. So I think my next few hours and days will be deep in economic tariff theory once again.
Okay, Justin and Gillian, you have to go for something medium term now.
I mean, the thing I want to see is what Donald Trump says, Donald Trump himself, not a spokesperson, but Donald Trump himself says about Elon Musk. So what's the state of the relationship? That's what I want to know. And you'll see it in the coming hours. What is the state of the relationship between Elon Musk? Because as I was saying, so much, I think, depends now on that.
I'm watching the bond market like a hawk and trying to see if bond yields on 10-year bonds go above 4.5% again. That seems to be something of a line in the sand as far as the administration is concerned, because if they do, we can start to see a lot more concern amongst investors and potentially the administration rolling back some of the more extreme measures.
And Gillian, just picking up on your point there, I mean, why should people in other countries and finance ministers in other governments worry so much about the sustainability of the American government's debt? What are the potential kind of spillover effects of it all going wrong for Washington?
There are two big reasons why everyone needs to care about the US debt. Firstly, that if American bond yields, the market interest rate, go up sharply, it tends to drag the rest of the world's developed market interest rates up too, particularly in the UK. But secondly, the American bond market underpins the global financial system today. And if that cracks, then the foundations of the global financial system will crack too. And we could be back into a world like, 2008.
And you can listen to a very informative episode of Old Newscast with me and Gillian if you'd like to hear more about what happened then. Gillian, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you. Great to be with you.
Justin, do you want to do a little plug for Americast?
Yes, listen to Americast. You'll hear me saying pretty much the same things, but other more interesting people saying more interesting things.
And there's also a little program called Today that you can listen to in the mornings. And Caitríona, thanks very much, especially on another busy day for you.
You're fine. I will plug The President's Path, where people can hear more about this and everything else this week.
So much to listen to. And that's all for this episode of Newscast. Thank you very much for watching. We actually recorded some more material, which you can listen to in the full podcast episode, which is available right now on BBC Sounds. And there will be another Newscast along very soon. Bye-bye.